The Marriage Equality Bill is set for its first reading in Parliament tonight, and the Prime Minister's warned it will get, quote, very emotive as politicians cast conscience votes on a gay rights issue. Our very own Tamati has had a civil union with his partner Tim, is pushing for same-sex marriage to be made legal. Here's a taste of what he told us earlier.
Civil union to me doesn't mean anything, and like I said in the article, it's just plonky to say as well. I just hate saying that I'm civil union, and it actually has no meaning, no depth to me. I do want to be able to get married, and I'll be uncivil unioned in a second if I could get married.
Well, joining me now is Labour MP Louisa, who initiated the bill, and also here in the studio, Bob McCoskrie from Family First New Zealand. Thanks very much for joining us this morning, guys. Louisa, I just want to start off by talking to you. Obviously, we just heard Tamati saying he really is pushing for this. The bill is expected to pass its first reading. But how important is it to you and the gay community as a whole that this does go all the way into law?
Oh, kia ora, Rawdon, and good morning, everybody. For me, this is about equality, actually. You've framed it as gay marriage, I'm framing it as marriage equality. And for me, it's about living in a fair and just society. It's about valuing every New Zealand citizen. And in New Zealand, you can get every other licence except a marriage licence based on the fact that you're homosexual. So unless we can get to a first principle, which is that every citizenship is equal under our New Zealand law, then obviously there'll be people who don't agree with what my bill is trying to achieve.
Louisa, many people will say the civil unions have presented us with the equality which the gay community is after here. Besides that quirk in the adoption law, which could be addressed in a separate way.
Well, again, this is about the privilege of marriage, and marriage as an institution is recognised internationally. And for members of our community, I think the question is, should the state be discriminating against a New Zealand citizen? Currently, that is the case because only the state can give out marriage licences, and essentially my bill will say that the state shouldn't discriminate. All New Zealand citizens should be entitled to get a marriage licence, whilst at the same time preserving the rights of our churches to discriminate, in fact, because under the Bill of Rights we have freedom of religion, and so my bill isn't going to affect how churches define marriage. It won't oblige a minister to marry a same-sex couple. So fundamentally, do we want to live in a society where all people are equal and have equality of opportunity in terms of marriage?
Bob, you're for equality for all. You're not against this idea of equality for all, but you started shaking your head when Louisa started talking about how, in a religious context, opening up marriage to same-sex couples comes into law, that won't be affected.
Well, that just goes on the basis of a legal opinion that we obtained that was reviewed by a leading human rights QC, Grant Illingworth, that said that no, it will breach the law, because what in effect it does is we're creating a whole new category of marriage. I don't understand the legalities fully, and I'd encourage people to go to our website and read the full opinion. The interesting thing is that the Human Rights Commission has not responded to it directly, but it does have a chilling effect for churches. But look, I understand the call for equality, but in 2004 we changed 150 bits of legislation to bring about equality. Equality is not sameness, and I think we have to understand that marriage was reflecting the relationship between a man and a woman, because only a man and a woman can produce a child. It is discriminatory because nature discriminates. A same-sex couple cannot produce a child, so nature is discriminating.
But a same-sex couple can raise a child as their own.
Well, they can, and they can commit to each other. But once again, the name that was given to that was civil unions. You don't call. I mean, we've tried to give men and women equal rights, but we haven't changed the definition of man to achieve that. We've just created those rights. Same-sex couples have legal recognition as it stands, and we don't need to touch the word marriage to achieve that.
So, Bob, is this about the semantics of what the word marriage actually traditionally means? Because you look it up in most dictionaries, it will say the commitment or the union between a man and a woman. If you start looking at the online definitions, the man and the woman is gradually being dropped to represent the marriage of two people who love and want to commit to each other.
Yeah, well, the fascinating thing is that, of course, in the Marriage Act of 1955, it doesn't actually say a man and a woman. Everybody just knew that, and the Marriage Act actually just put in some, well, you could say discrimination, in Louisa's words, because it actually stops someone marrying a close relative or children marrying or For example, I can't marry someone else because I'm already married. So the Marriage Act already discriminates. But once you change the definition, and this is a question I want to ask Louisa, is once you change the definition once, what stops you changing it again? I mean, if you take away the regulation of gender, why not the regulation of number? I mean, Louisa, when will the amendment be introduced to allow polygamy?
Well, it won't be introduced by me, Bob, and
Why
actually
not,
that's
though?
sort of scaremongering.
No, it's not scaremongering. Why are you discriminating against three people who want to marry?
Marriage for me is about two people loving each other,
What about
creating
three,
a family, and being a... That's not my bill, Bob. You find an MP
But you're
to put
discriminating
that bill towards
against
the
three
House.
adults who love each other and want to commit to each
That's not the Convention of
other.
Marriage in our country. Our country is about two people forming a family.
Okay, so
and
what
my
we do is we
question
agree
in
on...
Just let Louisa
2012,
finish.
in a
Okay.
modern democratic society, is it right that we limit the ability of the state to give two New Zealand citizens a licence to marry? That's the critical question.
Well, we do.
I'm
We limit
actually
a father
talking
and a
about
daughter. We already do.
We already have those degrees in a schedule that limits those types of relationships for a whole lot of reasons, power reasons, and I'm not going to get into that because that's not my bill, Bob. So to say that my bill is going to do all those
that's
things
why, I mean, I
is
think,
false,
Rawdon, we agree
and
that
you're
there
not
should be
having
a...
an open and an honest debate about what my bill is actually going to achieve,
Yeah,
which
Bob,
is to
I think we
enable two
agree
New
that
Zealand citizens
but
to
this is the
marry.
key
But
point.
let's
We
stick
agree
to
that
the-
there should be a line in the sand. What we disagree on is where that line should be drawn.
But I think that there is an overwhelming disagreement on the lines which you're suggesting might be
Which is
drawn
right.
further down. However, in this situation...
Well, it's always a danger.
But in this situation, we're talking... Your problem is redefining the word marriage.
Oh, it is. Once you redefine once, then that, you can redefine again. And we're simply saying we don't need to change the definition of
The lines
marriage.
in the sand which Louisa says you're scaremongering with would, in present-day community, never be brought into law.
Well, that's
However,
not true. It's been challenged in Canada, it's been challenged in Australia, and
No,
if you
and
look
that's
online,
false,
you'll
actually,
actually see
Bob.
websites in New Zealand that say, what next after gay
Well,
marriage?
that
So,
Canadian
just listen to
decision, you're scaremongering again, that Canadian decision was actually about a person who was employed by the state, essentially in the role of a registrar, who refused to enable two same-sex couples in spite of the law of Canada saying you can't discriminate. It went all the way to their Supreme Court. So that person you're talking about was actually an employee of the state.
That's right.
Who decided that, an employee of the
That's
state.
right. But we've had a quilter
And we
case.
have Section 29 in our Marriage Act that does not oblige a minister or a celebrant to marry anybody that doesn't fit their definition of marriage.
Well, I'll believe a
so
QC
I think
who
you're
says
being really
that is going
disingenuous.
to be
You're being
challenged.
incredibly disingenuous by bringing in
Stating the facts.
examples from other countries that are not relevant in New Zealand
Well, the
because we
quilter
have a
case
Human
was
Rights
a challenge,
Act.
and of
Guys,
course
I
now
want
we're
to bring it back to
changing
the. I want to bring it back to the bigger picture. Louisa, you're confident that this will eventually become law, that you have got the support you need in Parliament?
Oh, kia ora, Rawdon. I'm actually confident that it will pass first reading tonight.
What about
which
beyond
will
that?
enable
What
New
about
Ze-
beyond that, Louisa? Because I mean, this is a very emotive subject. I mean, how confident are you that members of Parliament might start swaying? Let's look at this politically as they realise maybe the popularity for the vote isn't there.
Well, I think as your poll this morning showed, there is a lot of support for this initiative. And basically, there is a lot of support because I think the younger generation of New Zealanders recognise that there is an inherent discrimination against a sector of our society. I've been pushing all along for this to be supported at first reading because what that will do is enable the New Zealand public to have a say. We have a democratic process that will enable my bill to go to a select committee. There will be submissions, and actually we can find out how relevant my bill is to a number of New Zealanders. Obviously, we know that there are some sectors of our religious institutions who don't like the bill, but I would be very interested to know what young New Zealanders feel about this bill, because this is about their future and their rights to marry the person that they find in life and love to form a family with.
All right, Louisa. Bob, if this does become law, will you just accept that and move on, or will you try and fight this from another angle?
I think you have to go with what the politicians decide in terms of changing the law. We're concerned about the effects it'll have. And look, I think one of the key changes if it becomes law is that it affects our adoption laws. Now, I think the politicians should be up front and say that this is one of the key aspects that they're looking at is adoption by same-sex couples, because our view is that for adopted kids, as much as possible. Death and divorce prevent it, but we think that a child deserves the right to a mum and a dad. So if we're going to have a debate around adoption,
but we allow gay people to
politicians
adopt now anyway.
As singles, yes, I know, and that's why I think the adoption law should be looked at, I agree. But the problem is that it seems to be coming under the radar under this whole marriage issue. So, look, I'm looking forward to the debate because I think we haven't had a good debate in New Zealand about the role and purpose and function of marriage. And so I think it's a great opportunity, personally.
I bet you wish you were sitting in Parliament for it. Bob McCoskrie from Family First and Labour MP Louisa Wall, thanks very much.
Update is brought to you by ANZ, proud sponsor of the New Zealand Olympic team.
A march on Parliament in favour of the controversial Marriage Equality Bill is gearing up in Wellington. The rally's to help the bill through its first hurdle in Parliament today. Its first reading in the debating chamber. If it passes, it will eventually give gay couples the same marriage rights as heterosexuals. Renee Graham joins us live now from Wellington. Renee.
Good afternoon. Well, several hundred marchers are gathering behind me here for their gay marriage rally onto Parliament this afternoon. It's marking the first historic reading of the Definition of Marriage Amendment Bill in the House today, and that is expected to pass. John Key, the Prime Minister, David Shearer, the Labour Party leader, all of the Green MPs, and of course the creator of the bill, Labour MP Louisa Wall, all are expecting the bill to pass and go through. Louisa Wall says it's about equality, fairness and choice for all New Zealanders.
For me, it's about living in a fair and just society. It's about valuing every New Zealand citizen. And in New Zealand, you can get every other licence except a marriage licence based on the fact that you're homosexual. So unless we can get to a first principle, which is that every citizenship is equal under our New Zealand law, then obviously there'll be people who don't agree with what my bill is trying to achieve.
But opponents of the bill say that this bill could open the way for breaches of the Human Rights Act. And in fact, yesterday, right up until the last minute, they were rallying on MPs to be against the bill. In fact, they handed over a petition yesterday with 50,000 signatures against it.
Thanks for the update, Renee. Renee Graham live from Wellington.
This One News Update is brought to you by ANZ, proud sponsor of the New Zealand Olympic team.